You might have worked with some crazy people in your life, but you have not worked with Harry Nilsson. That guy had a reputation. Lost Weekend with John Lennon, he was partying with him, and he was known for excesses in his life. Of course, Midnight Cowboy, everyone's talking, that was him. He didn't write it, but he made it a hit in 1969. One by Three Dog Night, another one of his songs. And of course, his big hit Without You, which became even more popular with Mariah Carey. That was written by Pete Ham and Tom Evans of Badfinger. But he lived hard and we lost him in 94. Producer, writer, engineer Fred Mullen was working with Jimmy Webb when in comes Harry Nilsson, ready to party. And he was rude, he was obnoxious, he was overweight, a shadow of his former self. And this story that Fred tells us is, well, Fred almost died. Harry almost killed him. We've already talked to producer David Henschel about his days with Richard Perry and Harry Nilsson, how crazy that was. And a lot of people who were in that orbit. Here comes the story. You're not going to believe it. On Rock History Music. Fred Mullen is a prolific writer, singer-songwriter, producer, composer, and music director whose career has spanned decades. He first came to prominence in the early 1970s, producing a handful of albums for Dan Hill, but most notably, co-producing his big hit Sometimes When We Touch in 1977 with Matthew McCauley. But he's worked with tons of artists, Jimmy Webb, America, Johnny Mathis, Billy Ray Cyrus, Billy Joel, and Chris Christopherson, just to name a few. He's done music for film and television, including Friday the 13th, the series, Beverly Hills 90210, Forever Night, and many others. He's received tons of awards. He also did a series of children's lullaby music under the Disney umbrella. His new book is called Unplugged. There are a lot of juicy stories in this. Stories and secrets from the life of making records, scoring film, and working with the legends of music. What can you tell me about Harry Nilsson?
In my book, there's a chapter on Harry. Unfortunately for me, when I met Harry in 1978, we were producing the album for Jimmy that was going to be called Angel Heart, and it was our first record with Jim, so it was a big deal. Jimmy was very close to Harry, and Harry had had these incredible, I mean, he was very gifted, and but by the time I met him, his he was ravaged by drug use and booze, and was literally 300 pounds, and um, you know, that didn't bother me. But we all use cocaine recreationally, but Harry sadly really destroyed himself. And he came to the studio one day. We were at Larrabee Studios in LA doing vocal passes with Jimmy. And Harry walked in. I had never met him before. And he saw Matt and I, these two young guys, producing his good buddy Jimmy. And I think what happened was he didn't like the fact that young people were producing Jimmy. Like, who are we to have produced Jimmy? So he wasn't particularly nice right away. And then he said, "Man, I got the greatest coke you've ever had." And I said, "Well," I said, "Harry," I said, "just wait till Jimmy's finished vocals, because if he does coke now, it goes to his sinuses and he doesn't sing well, you know. So can you wait?" And he goes, "Fuck you." And I'm like, "Okay." And he gets on the talk back, this big lumbering giant, gets on the talk back and says, "Jimmy, I got the best coke you've ever had. Come on in." So Jimmy takes his headphones off, comes in, snorts a batch. And I say, "Okay, clearly the day is over because, he's not going to be able to sing well." I'm thinking to myself, this is perfect. And Harry actually poured a bunch on the console and put his face on the console and snorted what was probably a couple grams worth of coke like an animal, like right off the console. And I'm like horrified by this big, fat, lumbering monster. And he was absolutely mean-spirited to me and Matt. And of course, didn't share his coke either, by the way. Uh, and anyway, that's the last I thought I would ever see of Harry. But it wasn't. About 2 weeks later, we were at a party at Jimmy's house. And, Jimmy had a wonderful home in Encino, and there were a lot of cool people there. And I was there with my wife, and um, into one of the room walks Harry, and I'm like, "Oh, shit," But he looks at me and he goes, "Fred," and I'm like, "Wow, he remembered my name, and he seems nice." He said, "Fred, man, good to see you." And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, I guess he likes me. And Harry goes, I got the greatest stuff. He said, you got it. You got to just come with me. So I'm like, Harry's offering me Coke. I'm going to take it. I walk into the other, there's two living rooms. I walk into the living room and he does something. He puts his hands like this, and he says, come on, snort some of this, man. So I put my head down, snorted it. And the next thing you know, I had passed out and I came to. I was lying on the floor looking up, and my wife is over me sobbing. And she said, you passed out and fell, and you missed this oak table by this much. She said, your head missed it by this much. And Harry is the other person leaning over me, and he's laughing. And he says, you idiot. He says, it was amyl nitrate. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy is like literally Satan.
What
And
is that?
amyl nitrate is what they give heart patients when they're having a heart attack. It's heart medicine, and it was used a lot for sex. People would use it when they climaxed. But, you know, I took a big slug of it, and man, the next thing you know, I had, passed out and I was coming to. And his laughter and saying, "Yeah, man, it was amyl nitrate," and he walked away. You know, so my time with Harry was very, very sad.
Wow.
And frankly, he could have easily killed me or given me brain damage.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Jimmy loved Harry so much, and he always talks about him and goes, he was the greatest, and I just have to shut my mouth, Shut-
Who's the most talented musician you've ever worked with?
I don't know if I can think of one. I can think of many. Greatest drummer I've ever worked with in the studio is Jeff Porcaro. Jeffrey was he was my age, and I got to work with him a lot in LA, and it was incredible to work with him. And he was a great pal, but I think he also played, in my opinion, he is the absolute greatest studio drummer that ever lived. So I would say Jeffrey for sure. Boy, on guitar, there's so many wonderful people. I wouldn't want to tell you I have one favorite, but I have many. Keyboard players, same thing. There's just people out there. There's a guy right now in Nashville who's been around for a little while, who's blind, and his name is Gordon Mote. And Gordon may be the single greatest piano player in the studio.
Wow.
He's absolutely supernatural. Yeah.
Rick Emmett was the first guy years ago who told me, he says, when you're a musician, buying a house isn't easy. Getting a mortgage when you're a musician, and you never, again, we don't need, no one thinks about that with musicians, but it's going, yeah. Kenny Passarelli from the Elton John band bought his first house when Elton John fired him. And he told me, he says, I got a chunk of money. I went, if I don't use this on a down payment on a house, I'm screwed.
Yeah. Yeah. We were, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you bring that up, I think it's a really valuable lesson that I think maybe the book helps impart, which is that, show business is not known, especially the record business, is not known for its accounting purposes anyway. You can really get screwed anyway. So it's important to know your business stuff and have business people who you trust. And also, again, like I said, don't don't spend your money till you have it in the bank.
You touch on the Beatles. There's that thing that everyone talks about with the Beatles, and I don't know why, for the love of God, that when I've been interviewing a lot lately, to me, I think I was moving away from Montreal when I was 7 years old in '67, Sergeant Pepper's, right? But before that, Revolver and Rubber Soul, which really showed to me that the Beatles were changing from the, Ed Sullivan Show, or even pre that in England. But what hit you about the Beatles? What was it? Do you have a Beatles moment? Was it Ed Sullivan?
Yeah, it was. I mean, so many of us, of people who were around my age group, millions of us, had our lives changed and directed by watching them on the Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th, 1964. It was like lightning struck all of us, and I was one of them. I was 11 years old. I had been playing drums in school, and I felt a natural musicality. But I saw these guys, and I was like, "Oh my God, I want that guitar. I want the girls screaming for me. I want to write songs. I want to have a band, and everything changed. And from that point on, I had a life in music. And very shortly after, 5 years later, I quit school to make sure I had a life in music full time. And the Beatles changed everything, and they changed the world. They changed. It wasn't just the music; they changed style, and they changed politics, and they changed everything. They changed the world.
I always love hearing the story of where they wouldn't play segregated places. They would, that like Paul and John, they just wouldn't do that. They're going, people are people. We share basically the same DNA. Hello. What is it with you and the sense of purpose of that 16-year-old, and you're still working and you seem to enjoy it. You look great. Uh,
Thank you.
as opposed to the sense of purpose you have now, is that little kid still live in you? Are you still in contact with that 16-year-old?
Yes, very, very much so. I still have that same excitement when I'm in the studio. I'm like I just feel that energy and passion that it's never left me. But you know, I was a single-minded kid because once I really started playing guitar seriously at age 11, and again wanting to be the next singer-songwriter. At that point, I wanted to have a rock band, and I just think that my path for me was sort of highlighted. I think a lot of kids were like, well, I might be a doctor, I might be this, but I want to do music too. I just had a single-mindedness, and I guess it's just who I am, that music meant so much to me and clearly powered me that I just had this absolute narrow path, and absolutely the school did not in any way help that path. It only hindered it. And I hated school, especially as I got older. So the minute I could legally, my parents were okay with it because they saw it coming, and I quit and started to try to make a life in music.
Because what part of school did you not like? Was it because the boxiness of it? Were you social in school? What kind of a kid were you?
I was social in the in eighth and ninth grade in junior high school. I sort of was okay. I had a girlfriend. I had good pals. I had a good music teacher. I got through eighth and ninth grade socially pretty well. When I got to the next school, which was in Merrick, Long Island, a lot of my friends went to a different high school. So I didn't really know a lot of people in my neighborhood's high school. And so I was sort of starting from scratch, but also at 16, I was just so ready to try to like knock on record labels' doors and see if I could get a record deal, that it was just poisonous for me to be in this structured prison, with 8 classes a day rather, of stuff I meant that meant nothing to me. Algebra, science, and as far as history and English, I could have taught the classes better than the teachers I had because I was a big reader. And so I just really, I think it was claustrophobic emotionally, and strategically. I needed to get going.
With Ray, how clear, and I think it's important when you're writing a book to do something like that because everyone can relate to that.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
how vivid was the memories of a guy like that?
You're talking about my bully. You're
Yeah,
talking
your
about
bully.
yeah. Well, I had a world-class bully, but I didn't realize it until he was later. He made, national headlines as someone who took hostages at a bank robbery and, and tried to do his own Dog Day Afternoon. But certainly as a kid, something happened that he turned on me because of something my brother did to him, and I was victimized by him terribly. My brother is 7 years older than me, and he was in college, and he was home for a winter break. And Ray Olson, who was a very tough guy and a bully, was walking with his friend across the street on our street in Long Island, and my brother had been meticulously washing his car, his pride and joy, and there was still some sort of dirty snow and dirty puddles from a snow that happened obviously in that time. And Ray decided to be an asshole, and he took a snowball as he walked past my brother and me, and he threw the snowball into a dirty puddle, and it splashed all over my brother's freshly washed car. And then, of course, he laughed, and his friend and he ran away. but they didn't realize my brother was a track star and he had a tremendous anger. So he took about a block to run him down, and then he caught Ray and brought him back to the car, by his shirt, and stuck his face into the car and said, "You wiped that car clean." And I'm this 7 year younger guy who is only, I think I was 1 year younger than Ray. And my brother made Ray wipe off the car completely. And Ray gave me that look like, "I'm going to kill you." And at one point, he actually said, "I am going to kill you." And my brother went back to college. And for the next 6 months, I don't think I went down my main street of my town. I was so fearful that I'd run into him. And interestingly enough, I had moved to Toronto and went back to Merrick. This was before Ray became the bank hostage guy. And he had gotten into the Grateful Dead and was sort of a hippie. And he saw me at a pizza place. And I thought, oh my God, I ran to Ray Olson. I'm dead. You know.
Even
And
now.
he goes, Fred, he's sitting down with his friend, says, "Come over here." And I'm thinking he's gonna say, "Come over here," and then sucker punch me.
Yeah.
Um, no. He was like, "Hey man, I heard you play music. I love the Grateful Dead. Do you like?" And the next thing you know, he's like my best pal for those hours we hung out together. And then, of course, I was back in Toronto and I read in the newspaper about this wild, bank robbery with hostages. And
So what
that,
happened
and
to
it
him
turned
after
out to
that?
be Ray.
So he ended up in jail, obviously.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, he was in prison, and then I don't know where he is now. I don't think he's gone. I hope he has a nice life. I mean, whatever.
You're probably the only guy I've ever interviewed who, at 16, heard there was going to be rain at Woodstock and decided to sell his tickets.
I'll never regret it. I mean, I would not have survived that weekend. I heard there was going to be a lot of rain. I had the tickets. I sold them to a friend, and I never looked back. I would never have made it through the Woodstock experience.
I was talking to Serge Fiore from Harmonium. He's dead
Mm,
now, just died.
mm,
And
mm.
John Woloschuk from Klaatu. They both said the same thing. They said, "I put so much on the table. There was nothing left." 'Cause I'm always intrigued by that. With your situation, what is it that how did you know you were at that point in your career, as we start in the middle there, that you said, I've had that's it.
I was doing. It was probably in my 16th year of composing nonstop for television and film out of Toronto, and doing a lot of U.S. work, but still being based in Toronto, being the Canadian content. And I had really missed making records because that really is what I started with, and it's frankly what I think I do best. And the deadlines and just the pressure, uh, and also sort of being a human jukebox, where you're just writing, 40 cues a day, and I'm playing everything myself, and I just hit that place where it was just, man, I was like a guy who's a killer fastball pitcher and I no longer had my fastball, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I was incredibly lonely during those years because it really was about, you know, sitting behind my keyboards and looking at the screen every day by myself. And I'm much more of a team person. I love working with others. So I think it all just compounded. And in 2001, I just said, Nashville is a place where they're still making records with live musicians. I really miss making records, love producing artists, and I just made the change. Yeah.
I talked to Lee Holdridge a little while ago. Took a little bit to get him out, but I was a big John Denver fan and Hot August Night, like that intro to Hog Up and Jonathan
Gorgeous.
Livingston
Yeah.
Seagull. But he had said that it's quite a solitary. He said what you just touched on, of the fact that you've got to create this big mood, this fantastic thing, and here you are in a little booth. And there's orchestras sometimes with what he was doing, but I looked at all the people you've worked with. It's like unbelievable. A lot of those people I've interviewed through the years. But Steve Picaro told me the same thing when he was, and I know you'd worked with him. And even Luke, he was not known as that guy, but is that wiring? Is that nurture nature? How could you create that? in that atmosphere.
the TV and film composing.
Yeah.
I just really just, sat at my Kurzweil keyboard and watched the shows and watched the cues that I had to write for each scene. And I just I just was like a horse with blinders on. I just did it. I really consider myself a horse with blinders on for those 15 years that I scored nonstop. I just was like basically it was me and the screen as I wrote and played. And I wasn't an orchestra guy. I was the guy they hired when they couldn't afford an orchestra. So I became someone who sort of gave a big orchestral sound through samplers and synthesizers, which was lovely. But again, it was just a lot of wear and tear after 15 years.
1987, I worked for a station in Edmonton called CKXM. They were a beautiful music station, and their audience was literally dying. And they said, what's this new age music thing that people are talking about? Like I've got like a stack of them right down here. And I went, well, I know a lot about it because I used to listen to ECM a lot because I like that
Yeah,
kind of spacey jazz
sure.
stuff,
Yeah.
Eberhard Weber and stuff. So I started that format, and I ran into a guy named Jonathan Reimer, Donovan Reimer, who worked at the Space Science Center, and he's the guy who had a Kurzweil. He said, "You got to come and see this thing." I'm going, "What's a keyboard? What?" He said, "Oh my God! How did you discover that instrument?" And tell us about it.
Well, when I started to, again, I fell into TV and film score. I did not look for it. I was actually, I had been in LA under the auspices of Clive Davis from 78 to 81 and was very burnt out on LA, and things were not going that well after we'd had a huge hit with Sometimes When We Touch in 77, 78. So I came back to Toronto and I decided I wanted to not raise a family in LA and stuff. So we moved back to Toronto, and I figured I'd be very busy with Canadian productions, and it got very slow. And then a few phone calls came in saying, "Hey, I'm doing again from people I knew, and they said, hey, I'm doing a TV movie for ABC. Would you do the music for it?" And I said yes, but meanwhile, I didn't really know how to do it. So the first thing I did was sort of investigate, and I had noticed that the Kurzweil 250 was this massively beautiful instrument of weighted piano keys and built-in sequencer and incredible sampled sounds. And it was absolutely cutting edge technology. And I happened to have had a connection with Robert Moog, who created the Moog synthesizer. And I had gone back with Robert when we were living in a Trumansburg farmhouse in New York, and Bob Moog and Shirley Moog were our neighbors, and we would occasionally shower at their house because our shower would go down. So I knew Bob way back when I was like 17, 16. And it turned out he was the chief scientist for Kurzweil in 1985. And I called him and I said, "Bob, I'm starting to do work in TV and film. Would love to have a 250. Could you help me get one at a price I can afford?" And he got me the wholesale price, which was delightful. And away I went. And I still use it to this day, although of course not, on occasion for an overdub. But for the 15 years of film and TV scoring, that was my main keyboard, and a lot of other MIDI keyboards were happening. But the Kurzweil is an inspiration machine.
Another vibe I get from the book, and you touched on it there, which is, in the acting world, people say, "Can you ride a horse?" And they all go, "Yeah, sure can. Those horses, I'm from New York City, but I can ride a horse." Uh, you're one of those guys. There's a
I will. You. That's so funny because that's exactly who I was. It was like, Fred, can you do, whatever? Could you write an instrumental lullaby album? Not write, but arrange an instrumental lullaby album for Disney. I had just been coming off of horror movies, and I just said, of course I can, because I think my whole career is predicated on me just saying, sure, yes.
What was it for you that is it just saying yes because you kept getting into these rooms and the rooms kept getting bigger and you people started knowing you. They knew your name. Hey, Fred, how you doing? Uh, what would have happened if someone whispered in your ear when you were like 15? Would you have believed it?
No, no. When I was 15, I had had rock bands, and then I wanted to become a singer-songwriter, and I quit school at 16 to pursue that. And that was really my main goal. I had no expectations of being anything more than a performing singer-songwriter. And frankly, I did okay, but I fell into opportunities, and to make a living, the opportunities were too. I mean, they were good. I mean, someone said, I mean, Dan Hill said to me in, I guess it was 1973, said to me, "Hey, we play a lot of the same gigs together, and I think you know a lot about records, and you're a good musician. Would you produce this demo for me?" And the next thing you know, a year later, I've produced his first album, and all of a sudden, my singer-songwriter thing gets pushed to the side because I liked being a musical arranger and record producer, and I liked being behind the camera, and I still do. I mean, outside of the 15 years that I did my TV and film years, my life really has been about making records and producing other artists, and I still think it's about the only thing I do well.
Keep in mind, we would love for you to subscribe to our channel. Click the bell notification so you don't miss anything. We're putting a lot of stuff on Facebook now with our Facebook page, which for quite a few years we haven't really done much with. But if you like vertical videos and things that come out every single day, and the link is in the description, join our Facebook page. If you want to buy some swag, we've got hats available and coats and all kinds of things with rock history music right on there. People will think, hey, are you part of our team? Wear them at concerts, wear them anywhere. The link is in the description. If you want to make a donation, there's also a link there to PayPal. But comment on our videos, like them, share them on social media. I'm John Bowden. This is Rock History Music. Take care.